A very good day to you. I hope you had yourself an amazing Friday, and welcome to the Black Hot Fire updates with me, Dimori. Here we're gonna be looking at, of course, each and everything that was making headlines in Africa today, but especially today we're going to be looking at something that is something that I love. I would say I love. It's a topic that I talk about so many times because it's something that I think more Africans need to understand as we are trying to liberate ourselves, because we've been trying to liberate ourselves in what I've been calling what you can call the second liberation of Africa. This is after we liberated ourselves from the first colonialism, that was the physical colonialism in the 60s and in the 50s. Now we are trying to liberate ourselves from what you can call the second colonialism, the second liberation, really, from neo-colonialism, from economic imperialism, and from imperialism in whichever form it comes in: religious, economic, cultural, financial, and especially financial. So I want us to talk about how the system is rigged, the financial system is rigged really against African people and Africa. When I say the financial system, I mean the current financial infrastructure, the current financial architecture that we are running on. I don't know what name to call the current financial architecture that we have. I would argue it's the Bretton Woods financial system. The reason why I would argue it's the Bretton Woods, the world runs on the Bretton Woods financial system, is because 99% of the world, 100% actually, runs on Bretton Woods financing. That is why the world debt is at an unbelievable rate, and you wonder, who does the world owe? You're asking yourself that question with Keith the other day: who do we owe if the world actually is independent? We talk about independent African countries, and when I was thinking about that, I saw a speech by, I don't know who gave this speech. I was talking about the same thing that I'm talking about. I don't know. Let me share the video first before I come back and talk about how the financial systems are rigged against Africa and the African people.
We must accept that we had intense debates in the past. We have issues with the global financial architecture. Those debates sometimes were misunderstood, gravely misunderstood.
And you should know there's a difference between painting the reality of the situation and playing victim, because what they say is that as Africans, we play victim too much, we blame them for everything. However, what we do is draw the reality of the picture and the situation as it is. Sorry for interrupting this man's speech. So the reality is, for years and years and years, pre, post, during colonialism, the moment that they realized that Africa was a rich place, rich in terms of culture, rich in terms of minerals, rich in terms of melanin, rich in terms of everything, rich in terms of spirituality, that was the moment that they started, dates back even before the Berlin Conference, where they scrambled and partitioned Africa like a piece of cake, with the Portuguese saying, I'm going to take this part, the British people saying, leave Nigeria to me, the French people saying, Congo is mine, dividing it like a piece of cake. Even before that, the imperialism goes back. You look at the coastal region, for example, when they started the slave trade, and when it dates back to years even before the Berlin Conference. And so what you're seeing in Africa is not as a result of 10 years of bad governance, 20, 30, 40. It is a result of, okay, the years of bad governance contribute heavily on the situation we have. They don't make it better for anyone. They don't make it easy. They make it harder for Africa to, when you are in a hole, you realize you're in a hole, the first thing that you do is you stop digging. We haven't really been stopping digging, but instead we've been digging further. So the bad governance, the corruption, and the imposition of leaders, puppets by the same people to us, has made things worse. But what you're seeing is not as a result of 20, 30 years of bad governance. It's a result of many years back, many years and years of being kept in the dark, years and years of being kept ignorant, years and years of getting looted and looted and looted. And we are rich if after all those years of them looting Africa dry, milking it dry to the bones, we haven't run out of resources. That tells you how rich we are. If Congo, after all those years, ever since it was Zaire, ever since it was the Republic of Zaire, all those years, if Ghana, after all those years, ever since it was the Gold Coast, still the resources are still there. It shows that just how rich Africa is. So as this man is saying, do not confuse us painting the reality of the situation to us playing victim. We are not playing victim. We're just saying that as Africans, the system has been rigged against us. And so when you are born an African in an African country, you do not start at 0. You start at -90. When a Ugandan is born in Ugandan and another kid is born in, let's say, Germany, the kid in Germany starts at, if they are poor, at 0. If their parents are doing a bit well, maybe at 20 or 10. But as an African kid, when you're born, you start at -90. Now you have to compensate for the negative, get to the 0, and now start rising up. Many die before they get to the 0. Many die in debt and in poverty still. 80% of people in DRC are poor, are below not just below the poverty line, but chronically poor. So it's not playing victim when we paint the situation as it is. And why is it playing victim when it's Africans talking about how the system is rigged against them, but philanthropic work when a white person talks about the troubles and the problems in Africa? When a white man does poverty porn in Africa, it's philanthropy. But when an African says the system is rigged against us and you people are responsible for most of the problems that we're having, then you are told that you're playing victim.
Especially between the North and the South. I think we are okay now. We are almost on even ground. And on the basis of that, we want to encourage ourselves to move on, to get the job done. I remember when we met in June in Paris, it was a very intense debate. But we are okay with that now. I think checking with colleagues that we interact with individually as heads of state from the North, I sense that we have some convergence. I'm repeating that so that I lay the basis for us to make progress, to support what President Nana has said. But as we do that, I just want to remind ourselves about the very basics that provoked this debate, that drove the need to change the global financial architecture. As we enhance our own institutions, Africa Export-Import Bank and others, we need to remind ourselves that the combination of the international institutions, our African institutions, the new institutions that we create, must not forget certain basics. Why we drove the arguments. I just want to summarize a few of them. One, we agreed that we are not assessed correctly in terms of the credit risk assessment of our countries and therefore our continent. And in this package of reforms, institutions, legal changes, we would like this to remain on the agenda of the package of our institutions, that we are not assessed correctly. We are basically given a higher risk profile unfairly.
What he's talking about, I guess he must be a president, some president from somewhere. So of course he's gonna speak from a selfish point of view, talking about they're not assessed correctly. So he's talking about how they should be receiving more loans. But do not look at it from that angle. Look at it from this way. From a distance, he's speaking the truth, even though he has trained it he has tamed it really. So how the financial system has been rigged in terms of credit availability is when loans are given to African countries, look at the interest rates that those loans come with. Kenya paid 900 million in interests last year for loans. 900 million, that is close to $1 billion in interest. You haven't touched on the debts. What you're paying is just but the interest. So the reason how to achieve that is by what he's talking about, putting high risk profile on African countries, so that now they'll give you, if you have a high risk profile, like the way they did the same to Kenya, Ghana, and so many other African countries where they devalue you, they put a high risk profile on you. They say loaning to that country is very risky. What that puts you in is in a desperate position. I'm talking about the current financial architecture and the current political architecture that we have. The current political architecture that we have in Africa is that of leaders borrowing. We borrow for about 40-50% of our national budget. If the Kenyan budget is at 3 trillion, you'll hear of a trillion or closer to that being obtained from borrowing. So most African countries do a 30, 40, 50%, 50, not a 50, a 30, 40%, 20, 30, 40% financing of their budget based on borrowing. So now what that means is, in the current political infrastructure, marry that with the economic infrastructure, the Africans will now be in a desperate position in the table begging for loans, because now you're going to the Bretton Woods and they tell you, but bro, your credit score is risky. We can't afford to give the loans to you unless you're willing to take it at a 20% interest rate. Because you're in a desperate position now, you are forced to take it at a 20-30% interest rate, and you end up paying 2-3 times over what you had originally borrowed. So the fact that the credit assessment, as this man is saying, even though I said as for the fact that I think he might be a president, he is of course going to be biased and self-centered in that he will be looking at how much his country receives so that he steals. But what he's saying is the truth. If you take away the self-centered part of it, the fact that they wrongly assess African countries, because if actually the credit assessment were done factually, then African countries would be the ones with the best credit score. Because when a bank is giving you loans, one thing they look at is what are your securities, what are you backing. I mean, if you are a rich man, you're more likely to get a higher loan at a lower interest because you're rich, and the possibility of you not paying back is low because you're rich. I mean, if a man driving a Lambo drives into a bank, he's gonna be given a loan. But for the fact that the credit score, the credit assessment, and the credit score in Africa is too low, shows you that it's not factual. It's deliberately done that way so that, because they know with the political infrastructure, the political architecture that exists at the moment, the politicians are going to be in a desperate position to borrow. And now, because they are in the other side of the table, the desperate side of the table, I mean, you'll have to take it at whatever amount I tell you to. I'm going to give you interest rates that are higher than the loans in themselves. And by doing that, I'll make sure that in the next 10-15 years, you'll come back to me asking for another loan so that you can pay me the other loan that I gave you. And then after this loan, you'll have to take another loan from me to pay this one that I gave you, to pay the other loan that I've given you.
And we should not forget that. One of the reasons that this is happening is because our balance sheets, our economies are not valued correctly. It's just one. Yes, there's issues of political risk, issues of business, exchange exposure, risk, name it all. That's why you experts are there. We want to remind ourselves that we are not valued correctly. We have assets that don't come into our balance sheets. That must change as we drive this change of the global financial architecture. I just want to remind ourselves about that. If you value an economy, Ghanaian economy, Kenyan economy, smaller than what actually it is, it means the headroom is limited for which you can access financing. That must not be the case going forward. That's number one. And we expect the institutions of ours, Professor Roma, to assist us, together with your colleagues, in valuing us correctly. Very important. Number two, very dry. We want to see a lower cost of capital. No debate about that. Engraved in what we do, the changes we drive, we want to see a lower cost of capital, a fair cost of capital. Africa is currently discriminated against in the pricing of capital. Of course, it's connected somehow to the risk assessment. But even then, same business, same sector, same profiling, everything, gearing similar, we pay more. Increasing the cost of doing business in our countries, on our continent, inhibiting the...
And you might wonder, what does he mean by increasing the cost of doing business in our countries? How does that even work? Well, that goes back to the first point. You will increase the cost of doing business in your countries, unknowingly or no. I mean, whether you want it or not, because for one, when you are taking the first loan, remember that they made sure that they hit you with the highest interest rates that they can. And when they're doing that, sometimes they give you controlled loans where they even stipulate the avenues, because the risk assessment that was done on your country shows that you are not even likely to pay back. They've made it look like you can't pay back at all. You can't pay back for your loans. So now they even stipulate, for one, you do not need the loans, for one, but they've made the political infrastructure so rigged that you have to look for the loans. Because one, they put you there, and now you have to. I know I don't want to go into the political side of it. I just want to talk about how they now ensure that even the cost of doing business in your country, the entrepreneur, you can't even get into entrepreneurship. They mess up everything, and you can't even start your own business yourself. So how they do that is because they have said that the country is too risky to loan to. The next thing that they're gonna do, of course, will be stipulate, because I don't trust you to pay back, so I'm gonna stipulate how you're going to pay me back, and that includes putting clauses on fuel, putting clauses on licenses, when I say clauses, I mean financial clauses. I mean, for example, they'll say when you want to start a business, if initially you'd pay 6,000 Kenya shillings for a license, now you'll have to pay 7,500. The additional 1,500 goes back towards paying the loans. So what that does is it kills entrepreneurship in a country. It goes to the deathbed because, for one, even the cost of starting a business is unbearable. And I was talking about how in Kenya, for example, you need 8, 6, 7 licenses in order to start a single business. One of them being, for you to start a water vending business, you need, I don't know, a license from the national government. There's a clause there. Part of the money is going back towards paying the loans. You need another license from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, the Ministry of Health. So they've made sure that, one, you're not going to get a job. Two, you're not even going to start your own job. And that is going to mean that the country will not even be able to collect enough in terms of taxes, because taxes run an economy, if you're being honest. But now, because there are not enough people employed, that means the pay that the government is going to collect will be low. And now, to compensate for that, the government has two options: either borrow more or tax people more. And that is why we have unbearable taxes in Africa, because most governments go for the two combined. They overtax people and borrow at the same time. That was as a result of the first one, where they wrongly assessed. They gave you an improper financial credit score, making it look like you're the desperate one, and making it look like you're not going to pay back your debt, and therefore they have to stipulate how you're going to pay it. That is, they're the ones who are going to mention the avenues that are going to be used in order for them to pay themselves back.
A much needed growth of our economies. Not accepted. So let's address that. It's number 2. Dry as it is. Combinations of funds, the SDRs we're talking about, everything that we're hearing. This must not lose us, or we must not lose it along the way. Number 3, someone may say this is controversial, but it's not. And I think my fellow colleagues who lead countries are aware that in Africa we're wasteful. Generally, we're wasteful. We cannot dictate what an individual does with their money. But when these institutions continue to lend, the new ones we create lend to us as African countries, we want to encourage ourselves and you not to lend for consumption expenditure. Let's focus the credit for...
Well, you have a nice idea, a very brilliant idea. How about we do not lend for consumption? How about we stop the wastage, because the wastage is too much, the overrepresentation is too much. We figured out that Kenya has almost the same number of representatives as the United States. The United States is about, 50 times bigger than Kenya. Kenya is of negligible size in comparison to the US, but they have almost the same number of representation. So the wastage that we see in Africa from the priorities, we get the priorities wrong from the very first moment. But then I remind myself, we don't even get the priorities wrong. Most of these debts come tied. Giving you this debt, I'm giving you this loan for you to go build an airport in the middle of Somalia, a country at war and with no food and with a GDP of less than 20 million, but I want you to go build an airport. Now the people will have to be taxed for years to pay for the airport that was not even necessary to be built in the first place. And do they care, the ones who give the loans? No. So this man talking about, how about we stop lending for consumption? That is a brilliant idea. But then that is going against the original purpose of the institutions that lend. They lend for consumption. They lend for white elephants. They can't lend for develop. Lending for development is actually a good thing, because it's creating avenues for you to be able to pay back the debts. Because if I lend you money and you start a company, a factory, for example, a coffee processing factory, for example, well, you're gonna get money to pay me back, and I don't want you to. I want you not to pay me back so that you can come borrow more from me to pay me back. So it is if we stopped, what he's saying is 100% factual. If the Bretton Woods were actually made for the purpose that they say they were made for, that is to help caution third world countries and developing countries from economic pressures, then they wouldn't be lending for consumption. That's a fact. Then they would be strict on the money they lend. They would want accountability. They would ask, we gave you 100 billion, what did you do with it? Then the interest rates would not be as high as they are. Then they would give waivers. Then they would give grants. They would convert the loans into grants. I mean, if you look at their documents, it looks like they were made for philanthropist reasons. But really,
revenue generation. Let's not support businesses, economies veering too much on luxury expenditure. We must focus on basics, growth, production, revenue generating expenditure, for which credit must be availed and priority given for that. Strongly believe in that. Number 4, very dry, very simple. Africa must buy from itself. We must do business with each other.
Another brilliant idea. How about we start trading with ourselves? How about we do away with all those economic blocks that do not really help in anything? I don't know, ECOWAS is supposed to be an economic bloc. Look at West Africa, messed up the whole of it. Look at IGAD, another economic bloc. What does it help the people with? But one thing that you have to realize is that you can't trade with yourself if you don't even have a currency. I mean, it's also stupid if I'm trading with myself using a foreign currency. If I'm trading with a Cameroonian using the US dollar, then there's no point. The Cameroonian can sell to the US and I can buy from the US. It's going to be the same process. So before we trade with ourselves, we need to develop either a currency or a mechanism. The currency is the best option. But as we build towards a currency, because developing a currency is not something you wake up one day and do. If it was, then Zimbabwe would... how many currencies has Zimbabwe had? About 4 in the last decade. So as we are building towards a currency, how about we start with a mechanism that and a plan that builds towards a currency? But of course, as I said, we cannot have economic reforms with the current political infrastructure. The political infrastructure is directly tied to the economic reforms that we want to make. So we first have to work on political reforms, and then you start to build towards economic reforms, because the economic reforms must be spearheaded by political leaders. They're the ones who set the rules. They're the ones who, we the people, hold the power, but they hold the pen to sign the deals. And we, of course, we have the power to go against whatever they say. But then we need to change the whole political infrastructure so that we can even allow for mechanisms such as the ones I'm talking about, so that we can be able to trade with ourselves as African people. What do we not have? What do we not have? Why do we have to depend on the West and on Europe and on all the other countries in terms of trade? What do we not have in Africa? We have enough food. We have enough resources. We have enough minerals. We have enough land. We have enough professionals to start manufacturing even the things we import. We can start manufacturing our own vehicles. We can start manufacturing our own planes. We can start manufacturing our own engines. We can start manufacturing our own electronics. Kenya had a vehicle manufacturer. Mobius used to make amazing vehicles. It shut down the other day. Nigeria has among one of the best doctors in the world. How about we make Nigeria our medical hub? So as we come to the end, this has been the Friday update. Today we are looking at how the system has been rigged against Africa. We are going to continue with this conversation on Monday. We're going to be talking about also how we're going now to be doing a part 2 on how the financial system has been rigged against Africa. So make sure to join me on Monday, and I'll be here also tomorrow on the Diary of a Young Black King, bringing you of course, talking about Pan-Africanism and the renaissance that has been happening. We're going to be looking at the Kenyan demonstrations, the Nigerian and the Ugandan one. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Much love.